Inside the reactor compartment, a network of steel pipes pulses with a fluid that will ignite spontaneously if it touches the air. It is the spring of 1957, and the engineers standing watch are betting their lives that liquid metal is the future of naval propulsion. If they are wrong, the resulting fire will be chemical, inextinguishable, and hot enough to melt the hull from the inside out. The story of the USS Seawolf begins in an era of boundless atomic optimism, where the laws of physics seem like suggestions rather than constraints. On March 21, 1957, the submarine lies pierside at the Electric Boat Company shipyard in Groton, Connecticut. The air is heavy with the specific industrial perfume of the mid-20th century, a mix of cutting oil, ozone, wet wool, and the sulfurous exhaust of yard locomotives. Steam vents from relief valves hissing into the cold New England morning. To the casual observer standing on the Thames River waterfront, the Seawolf looks like a sister to the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine which had commissioned 3 years earlier. They share similar hull forms and the same dark hydrodynamic silhouette. But inside the pressure hull, Seawolf is a radically different machine. She represents a technological gamble that Admiral Hyman Rickover, the demanding father of the nuclear navy, believes might offer superior performance to the pressurized water design he pioneered. The heart of the Seawolf is the S2G reactor. Unlike the Nautilus, which uses highly pressurized water to cool its uranium core, the Seawolf uses liquid sodium. The logic behind this decision is rooted in the seductive efficiency of thermodynamics. Water is a decent coolant, but it has limitations. To prevent water from boiling at reactor temperatures, it must be kept under enormous pressure, thousands of pounds per square inch. This requires massive, thick-walled steel piping and heavy pressure vessels that add significant weight to the submarine. Sodium, however, is a metal that turns into a silvery liquid at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. It transfers heat with incredible efficiency, far better than water. It can absorb the thermal energy from the nuclear core without boiling, even at atmospheric pressure. This means the plumbing system does not need to be as heavy. The reactor plant can be lighter, more compact, and theoretically more powerful per pound of uranium. The engineers envision a fleet of sodium-cooled submarines that are faster and longer range than their water-cooled counterparts. They see the S2G as the high-performance sports car compared to the Nautilus's reliable sedan. But sodium comes with a terrifying personality flaw. It is chemically violent. If liquid sodium comes into contact with water, it explodes. It strips the oxygen molecules from the water in a reaction that releases hydrogen gas and tremendous heat. If it contacts air, it burns with a fierce, caustic intensity. A leak in a pressurized water reactor results in radioactive steam, a mess certainly, but manageable. A leak in a sodium reactor results in a chemical fire that cannot be fought with conventional extinguishers. This danger dictates every aspect of life aboard the Seawolf. The entire reactor system is double-walled. The primary cooling loops carrying the radioactive sodium are sealed inside a containment vessel designed to prevent any contact with the ocean. But the complexity does not end there. Because sodium freezes and turns into a solid block of metal at 208 degrees, the reactor can never be allowed to go cold. If the sodium solidifies inside the pipes, the reactor is dead. The coolant flow stops and the system becomes a radioactive sculpture. To prevent this, the shipbuilders have wrapped every inch of piping, every valve, and every pump in electric trace heaters. These are resistance heating coils designed to keep the pipes hot even when the reactor is shut down. The electrical load is staggering. The Seawolf must constantly feed power to its own arteries just to keep its blood from freezing. As the submarine undergoes her final fitting out in early 1957, the mood at Electric Boat is a mixture of pride and anxiety. The shipyard workers are navigating a labyrinth of new materials. They are welding stainless steel alloys that have never been used in marine environments. They are installing sensors designed to detect the microscopic presence of sodium vapor. The friction between theory and reality begins to spark almost immediately. The S2G reactor system includes superheaters, components designed to raise the temperature of the steam generated by the reactor to make the turbines run more efficiently. In a fateful decision driven by cost and schedule pressures, the fabrication of these superheaters utilized rolled steel rather than forged steel. Forged steel is hammered into shape, aligning the grain structure of the metal to provide maximum strength. Rolled steel is pressed, creating a weaker, more porous structure. Under the thermal stress of the liquid sodium system, this decision proves catastrophic. During the initial dockside testing, the warning lights begin to flicker. The technicians monitoring the gauges see fluctuations in the secondary coolant loops. The sodium is aggressive. It seeks out microscopic flaws in the welds and the metal grain. Cracks begin to form in the superheaters. Admiral Rickover is watching. Known for his intolerance of failure and his obsession with detail, Rickover has already hedged his bets. He pushed for the Nautilus and its water-cooled reactor as the safe, conservative option. Seawolf is the experimental challenger. As the reports of leaks and component failures land on his desk in Washington, his skepticism deepens. Historians of the nuclear navy, such as Norman Polmar and Theodore Rockwell, have noted that Rickover was not opposed to innovation, but he demanded reliability above all else. A submarine that spends its life tied to the pier undergoing repairs is not a warship. It is a science project. And Seawolf is rapidly looking like a very expensive science project. On March 30th, 1957, the USS Seawolf is officially commissioned. She displaces 3,400 tons submerged and measures 267 feet in length. She is the second operational nuclear submarine in the world, but the celebration is shadowed by the technical reality below decks. The crew, a hand-picked elite of the submarine force, faces a workload that their counterparts on the Nautilus cannot imagine. They are not just operating a submarine, they are nursing a prototype. They live with the constant hum of the trace heaters. They patrol the engineering spaces with a heightened sense of smell, sniffing for the acrid scent of burning insulation or the metallic tang that might indicate a sodium leak. The sea trials reveal the full extent of the problem. The superheaters fail to maintain integrity. To keep the ship operational, the engineering team has to isolate the leaking sections. This forces the Seawolf to operate at reduced power. The dream of a high-speed, high-efficiency sodium submarine begins to evaporate. Instead of outrunning the Nautilus, the Seawolf is often limping behind her, restricted by the fragility of her own propulsion plant. Yet, the strategic need for the ship is desperate. The Cold War is accelerating. The Soviet Union is developing its own nuclear submarines. The United States Navy needs hulls in the water to develop tactics, train crews, and demonstrate capability. A flawed nuclear submarine is still more valuable than a diesel boat that has to surface every day to charge batteries. So, the Seawolf goes to sea. She sails into the Atlantic, a vessel of contradictions. She is the most advanced machine on Earth, yet she is hobbled by a metallurgical mistake made to save money. She is powered by a reactor that is a marvel of physics, yet requires a constant supply of shore power when in port just to keep from freezing solid. The tension aboard the ship is palpable. Every dive is a test of the containment system. The sailors know that they are riding on top of 100,000 pounds of liquid metal. They know that if a pipe fractures during a depth charge drill or a collision, the resulting fire would likely be fatal to everyone aboard. There is no manual for fighting a major sodium fire submerged. The only procedure is to pray the containment holds. Despite these handicaps, the crew performs with exceptional discipline. They manage the reactor's temperamental nature. They learn to balance the electrical loads to keep the trace heaters running while operating the sonar and the galley. They become experts in the idiosyncrasies of liquid metal, but Rickover has seen enough. The data from the first few months of operation confirms his bias toward pressurized water. The complexity of the sodium system, the need for heaters, the double-walled piping, the danger of chemical fire does not justify the marginal gains in efficiency. He begins to formulate a plan to end the experiment. However, the Seawolf has one more role to play before she is gutted. She has to prove that a nuclear submarine, even a flawed one, can do things that no diesel submarine has ever done. She has to disappear. As 1957 fades into 1958, the Navy prepares the Seawolf for a demonstration of endurance that will push the crew and the machinery to the breaking point. They are not going to fix the superheaters. They are simply going to bypass the broken parts, seal the leaks, and send the ship out to stay underwater longer than any human beings have ever remained submerged. It is a mission born of necessity. If the Seawolf cannot be the fastest submarine in the fleet, she will be the most tenacious. The stage is set for a record-breaking patrol that will test the limits of human psychology and mechanical reliability. But beneath the surface of this operational triumph, the decision has already been made. The S2G reactor is a dead man walking. The liquid fire experiment is coming to an end, and the question of what to do with the radioactive evidence is about to become a classified problem. On August 7, 1958, the USS Seawolf slips her moorings in New London, Connecticut, and points her bow toward the open Atlantic. She dives deep, and for the next 2 months, she does not return to the surface of the Earth. This mission is a calculated piece of theater designed to mask a technical failure with an operational triumph. The Navy knows the S2G reactor is flawed. They know the superheaters are cracking. They know the sodium system is a maintenance nightmare. But the Cold War demands a victory. If the Seawolf cannot prove that liquid metal is the future, she must at least prove that a nuclear submarine can sever its connection to the atmosphere completely. The goal is 60 consecutive days submerged. It is a test of human psychology as much as mechanical endurance. Inside the steel tube, the air becomes heavy and thick. The carbon dioxide scrubbers, primitive by modern standards, leave a lingering smell of amine, a chemical scent similar to dirty locker rooms and ammonia. It permeates the crew's clothing, their bedding, and their food. The crew operates in a state of suspended animation, cut off from the sun, the wind, and the day-night cycle. They navigate by the clock. They watch movies in the mess hall. They run drills. And constantly, they monitor the temperamental heart of the ship. The reactor is limping. To survive the patrol, the engineering team has bypassed the leaking superheaters entirely. The Seawolf is running at 80% power, effectively functioning as a simple steam plant rather than the high-efficiency supermachine she was designed to be. The engineers watch the sodium temperatures with obsessive paranoia. A single leak now, thousands of miles from port and hundreds of feet underwater, would turn the record-breaking patrol into a tomb. But the machine holds. The Seawolf travels more than 13,700 nautical miles without surfacing. She creates her own oxygen, she distills her own water, she traces a silent path across the Atlantic to the European coast and back. When she finally surfaces off Newport, Rhode Island on October 6, 1958, the crew climbs onto the bridge to breathe real air for the first time in 2 months. They are pale, bearded, and exhausted. They are heroes of the nuclear age, celebrated by the press and the president. They have shattered every endurance record in naval history. But Admiral Hyman Rickover is not sentimental. He looks at the patrol report and sees the truth behind the headlines. The Seawolf succeeded in spite of her reactor, not because of it. The maintenance logs are a horror story of frozen valves, heater failures, and corrosion. The sodium experiment has consumed millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours to produce a propulsion plant that is less reliable than the one in the Nautilus. Rickover makes the decision that defines his management style: ruthless pragmatism. He orders the program killed. There will be no more fixes. There will be no more redesigns. The S2G reactor is to be ripped out of the hull and thrown away. On December 12, 1958, the Seawolf returns to the Electric Boat shipyard. The commissioning pennant is hauled down. The crew is reassigned. The submarine enters a dry dock to undergo one of the most invasive surgeries in naval history. The workers at Electric Boat cut a massive hole in the pressure hull. They essentially decapitate the submarine, removing the entire reactor compartment section. The plan is to replace the exotic sodium plant with a standard pressurized water reactor, designated the S2WA. In a stroke of logistical luck, a spare reactor originally built for the Nautilus is available. The Seawolf will be reborn as a conventional nuclear submarine. But this decision creates a new, unprecedented problem. What do you do with a used, radioactive, sodium-cooled nuclear reactor? This is 1959. The environmental regulations of the future do not yet exist. There is no Yucca Mountain. There is no Department of Energy waste isolation pilot plant. Furthermore, the S2G is not just radioactive waste, it is chemically unstable. The reactor vessel contains the nuclear fuel core, heavily contaminated piping, and, most critically, thousands of pounds of residual sodium coolant. You cannot simply put it in a warehouse. If the roof leaks, or if humidity rises, the sodium could react, ignite, and spread a cloud of radioactive smoke across New England. Neutralizing the sodium, draining it, and chemically treating it is theoretically possible but dangerously complex and prohibitively expensive. The Atomic Energy Commission and the Navy look for a solution that is final, cheap, and far away from population centers. They look to the ocean. In the spring of 1959, a dark operation begins at the shipyard. The contaminated components of the S2G plant, including the reactor vessel itself, are loaded into a specially fabricated containment barge. The Navy engineers construct a 30-foot-high stainless steel containment vessel to hold the reactor. They weld it shut, creating a sealed steel coffin designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep sea. On April 18, 1959, a tugboat takes the barge under tow. It moves slowly down the Thames River, past the oblivious towns of the Connecticut coast, and heads due east into the Atlantic. This is not a public relations event. There are no reporters. The logbooks record the coordinates and the depths, but the mission is conducted with a quiet, grim efficiency. They tow the barge 120 nautical miles offshore to the edge of the continental shelf and beyond. They are looking for the abyss. They stop at a point where the charts indicate the water is 9,000 feet deep. This is the dumping ground. The procedure is stark. The crew opens the sea valves on the barge or uses explosive cutters to release the containment vessel. The massive steel cylinder, containing hundreds of pounds of uranium fuel, fission products, and chemically reactive sodium, slides into the water. It creates a splash, bobs for a moment, and then vanishes. It begins a long, silent fall through the water column. It drops through the thermocline, past the lightless depths where whales hunt, down into the crushing darkness of the bathypelagic zone. It takes nearly an hour to reach the bottom. It impacts the sediment of the Atlantic floor with the force of a train crash, settling into the mud 3 miles beneath the surface. The Navy marks the spot on a classified chart. The assumption is simple: the ocean is vast and the steel is thick. By the time the stainless steel corrodes and releases the radiation, centuries will have passed. The isotopes will have decayed. The sodium will react slowly with the seawater, dissipating harmlessly into the immense volume of the Atlantic. It is a solution born of the belief that the ocean is an infinite garbage can capable of swallowing the mistakes of the atomic age. For 20 years, the reactor sits there alone and forgotten in the dark. Then, in 1980, the ghost of the S2G returns. The environmental consciousness of the world has changed. The Navy, under pressure to account for its nuclear waste legacy, decides to check on the grave. They launch an expedition to locate the reactor and verify that the containment has held. Using the coordinates recorded in the 1959 logbooks, a survey vessel equipped with advanced side-scan sonar begins to mow the lawn. They sweep the ocean floor looking for the acoustic reflection of a 30-foot steel cylinder. They expect to find it sitting right where they dropped it. They find nothing. The sonar screens show the rugged terrain of the continental rise, sediment drifts, abyssal hills, and underwater canyons. But the reactor is gone. The search continues. They widen the box. They recheck the navigation data. Still nothing. The ocean floor at 9,000 feet is not a parking lot. It is a dynamic environment. Underwater landslides, turbidity currents, and the sheer inaccuracy of 1959 celestial navigation mean that the X on the map is merely a guess. The reactor could have slid down a canyon, it could be buried under 20 feet of silt, or the coordinates could have been wrong from the start. The Navy is forced to issue a statement that is technically accurate but deeply unsettling. They acknowledge that they cannot locate the device. However, they assure the public and the scientific community that the containment vessel was robust. They calculate that even if the vessel has breached, the slow leak of radioactive material at that depth poses no significant threat to human life or the marine environment. But the reality remains: a nuclear reactor is missing. Somewhere off the coast of Maryland, sitting in the eternal darkness, is a stainless steel bottle filled with sodium and uranium. It is slowly corroding. Salt water is eating at the welds. Eventually, the ocean will get in. When it does, the sodium will ignite in a violent chemical reaction, spewing radioactive debris into the currents. Back in 1959, with the reactor dumped and the problem solved, the shipyard workers at Groton turned their attention back to the empty hull of the Seawolf. The space where the S2G once sat is scrubbed and prepped. The replacement reactor, the S2WA, is lowered into place. The hull plates are welded back together. On September 30th, 1960, the USS Seawolf is recommissioned. She looks the same on the outside, but she has been lobotomized. The experimental personality is gone. She is now just another attack submarine powered by a reliable, boring, water-cooled reactor. For the next decade, she serves as a standard line boat. She chases Soviet submarines in the Atlantic. She participates in NATO exercises. The crew that mans her knows nothing of the sodium days. The memory of the liquid fire experiment fades into sea stories and classified reports. But a submarine hull is a valuable asset, and the Seawolf has something that most other boats do not. A history of being modified. She has already been cut apart once. The Navy realizes that this old hull, with its paid-for reactor and seasoned crew, offers an opportunity. In the shadows of the Pentagon, a new requirement is emerging. The Cold War is moving from open confrontation to covert theft. The Navy needs a platform that can do more than just hunt. They need a thief. They need a submarine that can crawl along the bottom of the ocean, tap cables, and steal secrets from the Soviet Union's backyard. The Seawolf is slow, she is old, but she is available. In November 1970, she receives orders that confuse the crew. She is to transit to the West Coast. She is leaving the Atlantic Fleet. Her destination is Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. She is about to undergo her second transformation. This time, they aren't just changing the engine, they are changing the soul of the ship. The experimental submarine is about to become a spook. For 10 years, the USS Seawolf lives a life of carefully constructed mediocrity. Following her rebirth in 1960 with a conventional water-cooled reactor, she becomes just another hull number in the Atlantic Fleet. She is no longer the liquid metal experiment that kept Admiral Rickover awake at night. She is SSN 575, a reliable, if slightly slow, attack submarine. She spends the 1960s doing the blue-collar work of the Cold War. She chases Soviet submarines through the Guyuk Gap, the choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. She participates in fleet exercises, playing the role of the enemy for carrier battle groups. Her crew changes over. The men who fought the sodium fires rotate out, replaced by sailors who only know the Seawolf as an older, somewhat idiosyncratic boat with a weird history. To the Navy, she is an asset with a limited future. She lacks the speed of the new Skipjack and Thresher classes. She lacks the depth capability of the deep-diving boats. By 1969, she is approaching middle age in a game where technology is advancing exponentially. The logical trajectory for the Seawolf is a quiet decline followed by decommissioning in the late 1970s. But inside the Office of Naval Intelligence and the Special Projects Division, a different calculus is being run. The Cold War has shifted gears. The age of pure confrontation is being supplemented by an age of theft. The United States has discovered that the Soviet Union is transmitting its most sensitive naval secrets not through the air, where they can be intercepted by satellites, but through underwater cables laid along the seabed. To get those secrets, the Navy needs a thief. They need a submarine that is expendable enough to risk, yet large enough to carry massive amounts of classified equipment. They need a boat that is nuclear-powered so it can stay submerged for months, but they don't need it to be fast. The mission isn't about chasing, it's about parking. The USS Halibut, a converted cruise missile submarine, has already pioneered this work, finding the wreck of a lost Soviet submarine and tapping cables in the Sea of Okhotsk. But Halibut is just one boat. The intelligence gold mine is vast. The Navy needs a second platform. The finger lands on the Seawolf. In November 1970, the orders arrive. They are unusual. The Seawolf is to leave her home in the Atlantic. She is to transit the Panama Canal and report to the Pacific Fleet. Her destination is Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California. When she arrives on the West Coast, the crew realizes this is not a standard overhaul. Mare Island has a reputation. It is the yard where the Navy builds and modifies its spooks, the special operations submarines that do not officially exist on public rosters. On March 24, 1971, the Seawolf enters the dry dock. The water is pumped out and the screens go up. Security is tightened. What happens next is a radical reconstruction that turns the submarine into a Frankenstein's monster of espionage. The engineers at Mare Island cut the submarine in half. Just forward of the sail, they slice through the pressure hull and pull the two sections apart. Into this gap, they insert a new hull section, lengthening the boat by approximately 15 feet. This waste plug is not for weaponry. It is for people and processors. The new space provides berthing for civilian technicians, specialists from the National Security Agency and Naval Intelligence who will ride the boat during missions. It houses banks of sophisticated recording equipment, signal processors, and tape drives. It creates a ship within a ship, a secure area where the regular crew is often forbidden to enter. But the internal changes are secondary to the external mutations. The Seawolf is being adapted to operate in an environment where submarines are never supposed to go, the ocean floor. Operating a submarine on the bottom is structurally terrifying. A submarine hull is a cylinder designed to take pressure from all sides equally. It is not designed to support its own weight against a hard surface. If a standard submarine settles on the seabed, the keel might buckle. Mud and sand can be sucked into the main seawater intakes, clogging the cooling lines for the reactor and the condensers. If the cooling stops, the reactor scrams. If the reactor scrams while the boat is stuck in the mud, the boat stays there. To solve this, the Mare Island shipbuilders weld massive steel skids to the bottom of the Seawolf. These look like giant sled runners. They distribute the weight of the submarine, keeping the hull lifted slightly off the seabed. They function like snowshoes, preventing the boat from sinking too deep into the silt. Between these skids, the engineers install a complex array of thrusters. Standard submarines steer with a rudder and propeller, which works fine at 10 knots but is useless when you are trying to hover inches above a target in zero visibility. The Seawolf is fitted with auxiliary propulsion units that allow her to crab sideways, hold position against a current, and maneuver with the precision of a helicopter. Aft of the sail, the hull is modified to carry a fish. This is a massive, 2-ton towed vehicle similar to the one used by the halibut. It is a sled equipped with high-resolution cameras, strobe lights, and side-scan sonar. It can be winched out on a miles-long cable, flying over the seabed to photograph wreckage or locate Soviet communication lines, while the Seawolf remains safely suspended hundreds of feet above. Finally, a diver lockout chamber is installed. This is a specialized airlock that allows saturation divers, men breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen, to exit the submarine while it is submerged. These divers are the hands of the operation. They are the ones who will swim out into the freezing darkness to wrap recording pods around Soviet cables or retrieve fragments of Soviet missiles from the silt. The conversion takes 2 full years. The Seawolf that emerges from the dry dock in March 1973 is a visual anomaly. She is covered in bumps, fairings, and strange appendages. She is uglier, slower, and heavier than she was before. She is also the most classified ship in the fleet. Her mission profile is officially designated as Special Operations. In the unclassified press releases, she is described as an engineering test platform. In reality, she is a bottom dweller. Her job is to penetrate Soviet territorial waters, places like the Barents Sea and the Sea of Okhotsk, and settle onto the mud right under the nose of the Soviet Navy. The tactical doctrine developed for the Seawolf is hair-raising. The submarine must approach a target area, often a Soviet naval base or a missile test range. She must navigate using high-frequency sonar to avoid underwater obstacles. Then she must flood her negative buoyancy tanks and deliberately sink. The pilots, no longer just helmsmen but true pilots, have to land the 3,000-ton vessel on the skids. They have to set her down gently like a lunar lander, ensuring that the currents don't sweep her into a canyon or flip her over. Once on the bottom, the reactor is dialed down to minimum power. The main circulation pumps are slowed to reduce noise. The crew switches to ultra-quiet routine. For days or even weeks, the Seawolf sits there. She becomes a hole in the ocean. Inside the spook locker, the tape recorders spin, capturing the voices of Soviet commanders talking to their fleets. Outside, the divers swim in the black water, installing taps on the cables that carry the Kremlin's secrets. This capability changes the strategic balance. The Soviets assume their undersea cables are secure because they are underwater. They assume their missile tests are private because they happen in remote oceans. They do not account for a submarine that can park in their backyard and pick through their trash. Throughout the mid-1970s, the Seawolf conducts these missions with ghost-like efficiency. She deploys to the Western Pacific again and again. She earns presidential unit citations that are never publicly explained. The crew learns to live with the cognitive dissonance of their existence. They are heroes who cannot tell their wives what they do. They are sailors who spend more time parked than sailing. But the physics of bottoming carries a risk that engineering cannot fully mitigate. The seabed is not a concrete slab. It is mud, clay, and silt. It is sticky. When a heavy object sits on a soft surface underwater, water is squeezed out from the gap between the hull and the mud. This creates a seal. If the object stays there too long, the mud settles around it. The pressure differential creates a phenomenon known as suction breakout force. The ocean floor grabs the object and refuses to let go. The skids are designed to minimize this, but they also increase the surface area in contact with the mud. Every time the Seawolf lands, she is making a gamble. She is betting that when the time comes to leave, she will be able to break the grip of the earth. For 8 years, the gamble pays off. The Seawolf lands, steals, and leaves. The Soviets suspect something is happening, their security leaks are inexplicable, but they cannot find the source. Then comes 1981. The Seawolf is deployed on a mission of exceptional audacity. She is sent to a location in the Sea of Okhotsk, dangerously close to a major Soviet naval installation. The intelligence target is high value. The water is shallow, dangerously shallow, and the bottom composition is soft, shifting silt. The captain brings the ship in. He sets her down on the skids. The reactor hums at idle. The spies in the special section put on their headphones. The mission begins perfectly. The Seawolf is invisible, silent, and listening. But as the hours turn into days, the heavy submarine settles deeper into the sediment. The mud of the Okhotsk Sea rises around the skids, inch by inch, sealing the gaps, creating a vacuum lock that holds the Seawolf with a force of thousands of tons. Above them, on the surface, the wind is picking up, and patrolling the sector, looking for exactly this kind of intrusion, is a Soviet trawler. It is not fishing for cod. It is fishing for shadows. And the Seawolf is about to become a very heavy, very stuck shadow. In the shallow, gray waters of the Soviet littoral, a trap is not always made of steel. Sometimes it is made of the seabed itself. The USS Seawolf, once the fastest submarine in the world, now sits paralyzed on the bottom of the Sea of Okhotsk, held fast by the terrifying physics of suction. Above her, 300 feet of freezing water acts as a lens, and on the surface, the enemy is turning to look. It is 1981. The Seawolf is 24 years old, an ancient vessel in submarine years. Her hull has expanded and contracted through thousands of dive cycles, metal fatigue slowly accumulating in her ribs. Her reactor plant, the water-cooled replacement installed back in 1960, is tired. Most submarines of her vintage have already been turned into razor blades or training hulks. But the Seawolf is still on the front line because she is the only ship in the fleet modified to do exactly what she is doing right now, sitting in the mud in the Soviet Union's backyard. The mission profile is standard, but the location is not. The submarine has penetrated deep into contested waters, slipping past the layered defenses of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. The objective is an underwater communication cable, a thick, black snake running along the continental shelf that carries the command and control traffic for Soviet ballistic missile submarines. The approach was nerve-wracking. The Seawolf had to navigate blind using high-frequency sonar to pick her way through the underwater canyons. When she reached the target coordinates, the pilots flooded the negative buoyancy tanks, making the ship heavy. She drifted down, settling gently onto her massive steel skids. The impact was soft, a controlled collision with the Earth. For days, the submarine has remained motionless. Inside the pressure hull, the atmosphere is hushed. The reactor is dialed back to the absolute minimum power required to keep the lights on and the life support running. The main steam turbines are idle. The propeller shaft is locked. The only sound is the low hum of the ventilation fans and the clicking of the tape drives in the spook locker. The intelligence take is good. The technicians in the extended hull section are intercepting a stream of high-level encrypted traffic. They are recording the heartbeat of the Soviet Navy. But outside the hull, the environment is working against them. The seabed here is not solid rock. It is a thick, primordial sludge, a mixture of clay, silt, and organic decay that has settled over millions of years. When the 4,000-ton submarine landed, she didn't just sit on top of the mud, she sank into it. The heavy steel skids pressed down, displacing the water. The silt rose up around the hull, filling the gaps, sealing the contact points. Inside the control room, the mood shifts from boredom to tension as the mission clock runs out. The order is given to prepare for departure. The crew moves to their stations. The technicians secure their tapes. The captain orders the ballast control officer to lighten the ship. Blow forward, blow aft. High-pressure air hisses into the main ballast tanks, forcing the seawater out. The submarine becomes buoyant. In open water, she would shoot to the surface like a cork. But on the depth gauge, the needle does not move. The Seawolf is generating tons of upward lift, but she remains glued to the bottom. The captain orders more air. The tanks are blown completely dry. The submarine is now positively buoyant, pulling upward with immense force. The hull groans. The steel frames creak under the strain, but the mud holds. This is the nightmare scenario of bottoming operations: suction. The physics are simple but brutal. Because the mud has created a perfect seal around the hull and the skids, there is no water underneath the submarine to replace the space if she lifts. To rise, the Seawolf would have to create a vacuum between her hull and the seabed. The entire weight of the ocean above, 300 feet of water column, is pressing down, holding the seal closed. The mud has gripped the submarine with a force that exceeds her buoyancy. The Seawolf is stuck. The situation is immediately dangerous. A nuclear reactor requires cooling. The Seawolf draws seawater in through intakes near the keel, cycles it through heat exchangers to cool the reactor components, and pumps it back out. Sitting in the mud threatens to clog these intakes. If the heat exchangers fill with silt, cooling efficiency drops. The reactor temperature will rise. If it gets too hot, the safety systems will trigger a scram, an automatic shutdown. Restarting a nuclear reactor takes time and power. Doing it while trapped on the bottom of a hostile ocean with no ability to surface and ventilate is a scenario that leads to asphyxiation. The clock is ticking. The captain has to break the suction. He orders the engineering officer to engage the main propulsion. Ahead slow. Steam flows to the turbines. The single shaft begins to turn. The 7-bladed propeller bites into the water. The idea is to rock the ship to generate enough forward motion to slide the skids out of the mud trench and break the vacuum seal. The propeller churns. The ship shudders violently. The torque twists the hull, straining the welds of the skids and the gondola. But the mud is tenacious. The Seawolf moves inches, dragging a mountain of silt with her, but she does not break free. Ahead 1/3. The captain calls for more power. The screw spins faster. And this is where the covert nature of the mission evaporates. A submarine propeller spinning near a soft bottom acts like a massive blender. It sucks water and sediment from the seabed and blasts it backward and upward. The Seawolf is kicking up a massive plume of mud. This cloud of debris doesn't just stay on the bottom. The turbulence carries it up through the water column. On the surface, the water is choppy. Patrolling the sector is a Soviet vessel that looks, to the untrained eye, like a rusty fishing trawler. It is dirty, weathered, and flying the commercial flag of the USSR. But this is an AGI, an Auxiliary General Intelligence ship. The crew on the trawler is not interested in fish. They are interested in anomalies. Their hull is packed with sensitive hydrophones, direction-finding antennas, and electronic warfare suites. They know the American operational patterns. They know that American submarines lurk in these waters. A lookout on the bridge of the trawler spots it first. A patch of water, a few hundred yards off the starboard bow, changes color. It shifts from the deep steel gray of the ocean to a murky brownish stain. It is a mud boil, a plume of sediment rising from the depths. In the middle of the ocean, mud does not rise to the surface naturally. There are no volcanoes here. There are no whales big enough to create this disturbance. The captain of the trawler knows exactly what he is seeing. He barks an order. The trawler heels over, altering course toward the stain. Inside the radio room, the operator begins to tap out a high-priority message to the headquarters of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. Possible submerged contact, stationary, anomalous bottom disturbance. Down below, the Seawolf sonar operator watches his waterfall display. A new trace appears. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a diesel engine. It is getting louder. The bearing is constant. The range is decreasing. Captain, contact Sierra 1 is altering course. He's coming right on top of us. The trap has snapped shut. The Seawolf is caught in the worst possible tactical position. She is immobile, pinned to the floor by physics. She is overheating, her intakes choking on the very mud she is stirring up. and she is now being hunted by a platform that can call in airstrikes and destroyers. The trawler arrives over the datum. It slows to a crawl, circling the mud plume like a vulture. Its active sonar begins to ping, sound waves hammering down through the water, looking for the hard metallic echo of a pressure hull. Inside the Seawolf, the pings ring out against the steel. Ping, ping, ping. It is the sound of exposure. Every sailor in the control room freezes. They are not supposed to be here. If they are forced to surface, it will be an international incident of catastrophic proportions. A U.S. spy submarine captured inside Soviet waters would be a propaganda victory that could destabilize the entire Cold War. The captain realizes that subtlety is no longer an option. He cannot wait for the mud to settle. He cannot wait for the trawler to get bored. He has to break the ship loose, even if it means breaking the ship itself. He looks at the engineering officer. He orders a maneuver that is strictly forbidden in the manual for bottoming operations. He orders power, raw, violent horsepower. He is going to try to tear the submarine off the bottom by brute force. All ahead full, cavitate the screw. The order is relayed. The reactor control rods are pulled out. The steam pressure builds. The turbines scream as the throttle valves are thrown wide open. The propeller shaft, accustomed to gentle turns, ramps up to maximum revolutions. The water behind the Seawolf explodes into turbulence. The propeller thrashes, creating a cavitation storm of collapsing bubbles and churning mud. The noise is deafening, a mechanical roar that wipes out the sonar screens. The submarine lurches. The suction fights back. The steel skids dig into the clay. The hull groans under the tortured geometry of thrust versus resistance. Something has to give. Either the mud will let go, or the keel will rip off. For a long, agonizing second, the Seawolf remains stuck, vibrating like a trapped animal, while the Soviet trawler above watches the ocean boil. Then, with a sound like a cannon shot, metal shears. The sound that rips through the pressure hull of the USS Seawolf is not the dull thud of a collision or the hiss of a pipe failure. It is the high-pitched shriek of structural steel being torn apart by torque. Deep beneath the keel, the bolts and welds securing the massive underbelly gondola to the submarine reach their yield point. The physics of the situation resolve in a single violent instant. The mud refuses to let go, so the submarine leaves a part of herself behind. The underbelly gondola, the external housing that contains the retractable skids, the auxiliary thrusters, and tons of classified sensor equipment shears away from the hull. It remains embedded in the sediment of the Sea of Okhotsk, a multi-million-dollar piece of American technology abandoned in Soviet waters. Freed from the anchor of the mud, the Seawolf rockets upward. The buoyancy that had been fighting the suction suddenly takes over. The submarine lurches, rolling heavily to port as she breaks loose from the seabed. In the control room, men grab handrails to keep their footing. The deck angles sharply. The depth gauge needle spins. "We are free of the bottom," the ballast control officer shouts, his voice cutting through the alarms. "Rising fast." The captain has no time to celebrate the escape. He knows that the violence of the breakout has just created a new, possibly fatal problem. The Seawolf is no longer a sleek, hydrodynamic cylinder. She is a wounded animal. The bottom of her hull, where the gondola used to be, is now a jagged scar of torn metal, severed cables, and exposed plumbing. As the submarine accelerates, the water flow over this damage creates a chaotic, acoustic signature. Loose plating bangs against the steel hull. Hydraulic lines whip in the current. To the sonar operators on the Soviet trawler circling overhead, the Seawolf does not sound like a submarine anymore. She sounds like a bucket of bolts tumbling down a staircase. The trawler captain on the surface hears the noise even without his headphones. The active sonar return is unmistakable. The American submarine has broken cover. He barks orders to his helm. The trawler comes about, its diesel engine revving to maximum RPM, black smoke pouring from its stack. It settles onto a pursuit course, locking its fire control radar onto the area where the submarine is churning the water. Inside the Seawolf, the sonar room is a scene of controlled panic. "Sierra 1 is in pursuit," the operator reports. "He's active. He's holding contact." The captain makes the only decision available to him. He cannot go silent. The damage to the keel means the ship will make noise even at low speeds. Stealth is gone. The only variable left is velocity. He has to outrun the trawler before the Soviet Navy can vector in fast attack aircraft or drop anti-submarine torpedoes. All ahead, flank. It is an order that demands everything the 24-year-old engineering plant can give. Back in the maneuvering room, the throttleman spins the main steam valves wide open. The reactor power climbs to 100%. The turbines whine, pitch increasing until it becomes a physical vibration in the deck plates. The Seawolf shudders as she pushes past 20 knots. She is vibrating dangerously. The water tearing past the damaged keel creates cavitation pockets that hammer against the hull. The noise is deafening, washing out the ship's own sonar arrays. They are flying blind, deaf, and screaming, relying on a map of the ocean floor stored in the navigational computer. They run for the open ocean. They run for the 12-mile limit that marks the boundary of international waters. The chase that ensues is a contest between two different eras of propulsion. The Soviet trawler is a diesel-powered vessel. It has a top speed of perhaps 12 or 13 knots. The Seawolf, even damaged and dragging a chaotic wake, can push closer to 25 or 30 knots submerged. Slowly, agonizingly, the gap begins to widen. On the surface, the trawler pushes its engines to the red line. The Soviet captain knows he cannot catch the submarine, but that is not his job. His job is to maintain the datum, the last known position and heading of the intruder. He keeps his active sonar pinging, a relentless electronic heartbeat that tracks the fleeing American. He transmits continuous updates to the Soviet Pacific Fleet headquarters in Vladivostok. Target is moving south-southeast, high speed, heavy acoustic signature, debris field in the water. For the crew of the Seawolf, the escape is a physical ordeal. At flank speed, the submarine is not a smooth ride. The vibration rattles teeth. Dust shakes loose from the overheads. The reactor team watches their gauges with intense focus. They are running the plant at maximum output, generating immense heat that must be dumped into the ocean. If the seawater intakes clog with mud from the breakout, the reactor will scram and the chase will be over. But the old S2WA reactor, the reliable water-cooled plant that replaced the sodium experiment, holds the line. The intakes clear themselves. The steam pressure holds steady. Minutes turn into hours. The Seawolf crosses the 12-mile line. Technically, they are now in international waters. Legally, the Soviets cannot attack them here without starting a war. But practically, the ocean is a lawless place. The trawler does not turn back. It continues the pursuit, asserting its right to track a foreign warship operating near its coast. The pursuit drags on for 6 hours. This is where the nuclear advantage becomes absolute. The trawler is burning fuel at a prodigious rate. Its diesel bunkers are finite. Its engines are overheating. The crew is fatigued. The Seawolf, by contrast, is powered by the splitting of atoms. Her range at maximum speed is limited only by the endurance of the lubricating oil and the nerves of the crew. She can run at flank speed for days, weeks if necessary. Somewhere in the deep waters of the Pacific, well beyond the territorial shelf, the geometry of the chase finally breaks. The Soviet trawler falls behind. The acoustic return from the Seawolf fades into the background noise of the ocean. The mud boil trail has dissipated. Lost contact with Sierra 1, the sonar operator reports. The voice is tired, flat, relieved. The captain does not slow down immediately. He keeps the throttle open, putting miles between his ship and the crime scene. He runs for another 12 hours, heading deep into the open Pacific, putting distance between the Seawolf and the inevitable Soviet response fleet that is surely steaming toward the Okhotsk Sea. Only when they are hundreds of miles away does the order finally come to reduce speed. All ahead 1/3. The turbines spin down. The vibration dies away. The roar of the water rushing past the hull fades to a murmur, but the silence that usually defines a submarine is absent. Even at slow speed, there is a rhythmic clank, clank, clank coming from the keel, the sound of something broken, banging against the steel. The captain orders a damage assessment. They cannot go outside to look, but they can listen. The hydrophones confirm the bad news. The underbelly gondola is gone, the fairings are stripped, the Seawolf has lost her legs. The specialized equipment that allowed her to sit on the bottom and spy on the Soviet Union is lying in the mud 300 miles behind them. But the implications are worse than just hardware damage. The Soviets now have two things they didn't have yesterday. First, they have the physical wreckage of the gondola. Soviet divers will almost certainly recover it. They will analyze the metallurgy, the thruster design, and the sensor mounts. They will learn exactly how American spy submarines are built. Second, and perhaps more damaging, they have the acoustic tape. The trawler recorded the Seawolf as she fled. They have the sound signature of a damaged Seawolf-class hull. They know what the pump frequencies sound like. They know the turn rate of the propeller. The Seawolf has been fingerprinted. She can never go back to that patrol area again. If she shows up, the Soviet computers will recognize her instantly. The mission is a failure in terms of stealth, but a triumph of survival. They got the tapes, they got the intelligence, and they got the boat back. As the adrenaline fades, the crew settles into the long, slow transit home. They are heading for Bangor, Washington. It will be a long voyage. The submarine is limping. The noise from the keel means they have to be careful to avoid American tracking stations, lest they trigger a false alarm. When they finally pull into the Hood Canal weeks later, in October 1981, the reception is quiet. There are no bands. There are no cameras. The Seawolf is guided into a secluded dry dock at night. Screens are erected to hide the damage from curious eyes. When the water is pumped out of the dock, the engineers walk under the hull and stare in silence. The violence of the escape is written in the steel. The keel looks like it has been chewed by a giant animal. Welds are ripped open. Heavy steel plates are bent back like tin foil. The fact that the pressure hull itself didn't breach is a testament to the over-engineering of 1950s naval architecture. The Navy awards the Submarine the Navy Expeditionary Medal. It is a blanket award used to cover classified operations. The citation is vague. It mentions meritorious service and operations in a high-threat environment. It says nothing about suction, trawlers, or the piece of the ship left behind in the Soviet Union. The crew is debriefed and sworn to silence. They are told that what happened in the Sea of Okhotsk never happened. The loss of the equipment is written off as storm damage or operational wear and tear in the unclassified logs. But the Seawolf is not done. The Navy looks at the broken keel and makes a decision. The Cold War is peaking. The Reagan administration is pushing for a 600-ship Navy. Intelligence is more valuable than ever. They are not going to scrap her. They are going to rebuild her. The shipyard workers at Mare Island are called upon once again. They fabricate a new gondola. They redesign the skids to prevent suction lock, adding systems to inject water or air between the pads and the mud to break the seal. They patch the hull. They replace the lost sensors. It takes months, but the Seawolf returns to the fleet. She goes back out. She returns to the Western Pacific. But the game has changed. The Soviet Navy is more alert now. They know the Americans are parking on the bottom. The cat-and-mouse game becomes deadlier. The escape of 1981 becomes a legend in the submarine force, a sea story whispered in wardrooms and chiefs' quarters. It is the story of the time the Seawolf got caught in the trap and chewed her own leg off to get free. It is a story of survival, but it marks the beginning of the end. The old boat is tired. She has one more act to play before the curtain falls. But the shadow of the lost reactor and the scars of the Okhotsk Sea are heavy burdens to carry into the final years of the Cold War. In the years following the violent escape from the Sea of Okhotsk, the USS Seawolf returns to the silent, grinding routine of the Cold War, but she is a changed ship. The shipyard workers at Mare Island managed to reconstruct the underbelly gondola, welding new steel over the scars left by the 1981 breakout. They install redesigned skids equipped with mud injection systems intended to break the terrifying suction that nearly claimed the vessel. But metal has a memory, and so do men. The submarine that slips back into the Pacific in the mid-1980s is operating on borrowed time. The pressure hull, first welded together in the mid-1950s, has endured 3 decades of compression and expansion. The steel is tired. Microscopic fatigue cracks, invisible to the naked eye, are accumulating in the frames. The reactor plant, though reliable, is an antique compared to the propulsion systems driving the new Los Angeles-class boats. Yet, the mission continues because the appetite for intelligence is insatiable. Throughout the Reagan era, as the rhetoric between Washington and Moscow heats up, the Seawolf is sent back into the darkness. She returns to the Soviet littoral, though with a newfound caution. The commanders are more selective about where they set the ship down. They check the bottom charts with paranoid intensity. The mud trap incident has become a classified lesson learned, taught in the briefing rooms of naval intelligence. The intelligence gathered during these twilight years remains largely redacted, but the decorations tell the story. The Seawolf earns citations for significant contributions to national security. In the language of the Silent Service, this means she is still stealing things the Soviets desperately want to keep. She is tapping new cables, recording new missile telemetry, and mapping the acoustic signatures of the latest Soviet Typhoon and Akula-class submarines. But technology is moving on. The Navy is already grooming a successor. The USS Parch, a Sturgeon-class submarine, has been heavily modified to take over the Special Projects mantle. She is newer, deeper diving, and equipped with even more advanced ocean engineering gear. And on the drawing boards, the ultimate spy submarine is being conceived, a massive vessel that will eventually become the USS Jimmy Carter. The Seawolf has become a grandfather in a game of young athletes. The maintenance burden is becoming unsustainable. Every month at sea requires weeks of repair in port. The cost of keeping the 30-year-old machinery running is rising exponentially. In June 1986, the Seawolf returns to Mare Island from her final Western Pacific deployment. There is no fanfare, just the quiet satisfaction of a crew that brought the old girl home one last time. The decision has been made. There will be no more overhauls. The Cold War is entering its final phase, and the Seawolf will not see the end of it. On March 30th, 1987, exactly 30 years to the day after she was commissioned, the USS Seawolf is formally decommissioned. The ceremony is respectful but modest. The crew stands in formation on the pier. The American flag is hauled down. The commissioning pennant is rolled up. The reactor is shut down forever, its fires banked and cold. For the next decade, the hull sits in the reserve fleet, a rusting steel cylinder floating in the backwaters of the Navy Yard. She is a ghost ship, stripped of her classified gear, her sensors removed, her secrets locked away in vaults. Then comes the final indignity, which is also a necessity. In October 1996, the Seawolf enters the ship submarine recycling program at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. This is the industrial slaughterhouse for nuclear submarines. Workers with plasma torches cut the hull into sections. The steel that once held back the pressure of the deep ocean is sliced into scrap metal. The reactor compartment, the section containing the S2WA plant installed in 1960, is cut out as a single, massive cylinder. It is sealed in steel and concrete, loaded onto a barge, and shipped up the Columbia River to the Hanford site in eastern Washington. There, it is buried in a giant trench alongside the reactor compartments of dozens of other submarines. It is a graveyard of giants, visible from Google Earth as rows of rusty cylinders in the high desert. By September 30th, 1997, the USS Seawolf has ceased to exist. But while the steel is gone, the Seawolf leaves behind two distinct legacies, one human and one radioactive. The human legacy is defined by silence. The thousands of men who served aboard her, from the sodium pioneers of 1957 to the mud-stained spies of 1981, carry the weight of what they did. They are the keepers of secrets that may never be declassified. They know how close the world came to disaster in the Sea of Okhotsk. They know what it feels like to sit on the bottom of the ocean, hearing the enemy's propellers overhead, waiting for the depth charges that thankfully never came. They fought a war that was never declared, on a battlefield no one could see, using a weapon that was constantly evolving. They bridged the gap between the reckless experimentation of the atomic age and the precise, high-stakes espionage of the modern era. The second legacy is darker, and it lies 3,000 miles away from the scrapyards of Washington State. Deep in the Atlantic Ocean, 120 miles off the coast of Maryland, the original heart of the Seawolf is still beating, in a manner of speaking. The S2G liquid sodium reactor, dumped there in 1959, sits in the eternal darkness of the abyssal plain. The Navy's inability to relocate the reactor in 1980 remains a troubling footnote in environmental history. Somewhere in the chaotic topography of the continental rise, a stainless steel bottle is slowly losing its battle with chemistry. The physics of corrosion are relentless. Salt water is attacking the welds. It may take another century, or it may have happened yesterday, but eventually, the ocean will breach the containment. When it does, the water will rush in. It will meet the solidified block of sodium coolant. The reaction will be violent. a chemical explosion deep underwater releasing heat and hydrogen gas. The radioactive core, containing cesium-137, strontium-90, and plutonium, will be exposed to the biosphere. It will drift in the deep currents. It is a slow-motion poison pill, left by a generation that believed the ocean was infinite enough to hide their mistakes. This lost reactor is the shadow that the Seawolf casts across history. It is a symbol of the immense costs of the Cold War, costs that are not paid in money, but in environmental debt. The urgency to defeat the Soviet Union justified almost any risk, any shortcut, any disposal method. We are living in the world that victory created, but we are also living with the debris it left behind. The USS Seawolf was a ship of contradictions. She was a failure that became a success. She was a loud, clumsy prototype that became a silent master thief. She was a machine that broke the rules of physics, first with liquid metal, then with seabed suction. Today, her lineage lives on in the USS Jimmy Carter, a submarine that roams the deep with a hull extension remarkably similar to the one pioneered on Seawolf. The mission has not changed. The cables are fiber optic now, not copper. The targets are different, but the game is the same. Somewhere in the deep, a submarine is sitting in the mud, listening. And it is doing so because the Seawolf showed them how. The story of the USS Seawolf is more than a technical history of a specific submarine. It is a microcosm of the Cold War itself. It captures the terrifying ambition of the 1950s, a time when engineers believed they could conquer nature with atomic power, regardless of the consequences. It transitions into the pragmatic, shadowy struggle of the 1970s and 80s, where the battle wasn't fought with torpedoes, but with tape recorders and nerve. What stands out most in this investigation is the sheer adaptability of the human crews. Whether they were nursing a fire-prone sodium reactor or tearing their own ship apart to escape a mud trap, the sailors of the Seawolf consistently overcame the limitations of their machinery. They operated in a domain that is inherently hostile to human life, inside a vessel that was often an experiment in progress. There's also a somber lesson in the missing reactor on the Atlantic floor. It reminds us that the urgency of national survival often leaves scars that outlast the conflict. The Seawolf is gone, recycled into razor blades and rebar, but the radioactive decision made in 1959 remains. It is a ghost that will haunt the ocean long after the political ideologies of the 20th century have been forgotten. History is often written about the ships that fired the shots or won the famous battles. But the Seawolf reminds us that some of the most critical history happened in the silence, stuck in the mud, in the dark, where no one was watching. Thank you for spending part of your day with us to uncover these hidden files. If this journey meant something to you, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.